You can be creative in so many different ways being an audio engineer. You can be creative in business and how you promote your business and how you market your business. That's what I love about it. And it goes back to way back what we said at the beginning about creating content and like getting that content buzz. It's because I just like being creative.
That's Marc Matthews, producer, master engineer, and the host of the Inside the Mix podcast. So in this episode, I thought it would be fun to do something a bit different and talk about what he and I have learned from our years of podcasting and how that actually applies to our music career. I've become a firm believer that making stuff, whether that's content, music, art, whatever, is super important for us behind the scenes pros because it can feed our creativity. So today we're going to talk about the unexpected benefits of making content.
But it's building trust, and that's something that I didn't realize would happen as a result, is building trust with the audience enough that they would reach out to me and ask for help.
How to figure out what kind of content you could be making.
If you are stuck for ideas, if you're thinking, actually, I want to start a podcast or I want to start creating useful tips online, look at
how tracking your time and scoring your progress can be a fun way to gamify your career growth.
And then you look and you realize, oh, actually, I'm not putting in as much time as I thought I was. And that's probably why I'm not kicking on and progressing.
And finally, since Marc is a mastering engineer, we couldn't go without getting into the hot topic of AI versus human.
Maybe you want that track to be a little brighter than the AI is saying that it should be, according to its data set.
So lots of stuff in this one. It's a super fun hang. Stick around for my conversation with Marc Matthews. So I'm curious to know if you've ever felt this way, because I have, and I think it's also the number one reason why audio pros shy away from making content. They're afraid that people will see them as a content creator instead of a mixing engineer or producer or whatever they want to do. You're working as a producer, mastering engineer. Have you ever felt that and kind of had that battle?
I can't say I have, to be honest. I mean, when it comes to content creation, I think it comes down to why you are creating that particular content. And I made a couple notes here for this one. And the first one's sort of authentic content. So the reason I create content, so I've got the podcast, I've got YouTube, social media in terms of Instagram, was on TikTok, still am, but don't use it. I won't even go into that. But yeah, it's okay. The way I see it is I want to share knowledge that I've sort of gathered over the 15 plus years that I've sort of been in bands and mixing, mastering, producing music and whatnot, but doing it from an authentic perspective and an authentic point of view. Because I think, and I had this conversation on the Inside the Mix podcast, so it was episode 132 with Jenny Fritz, and we were talking about promoting your own music and how I think an audience can quickly see if you are not authentic with what you're trying to do. And where I'm going with this is that I don't see myself, well, I guess you are a content creator. I create content, so I guess I am a content creator, but that's not sort of the label I attribute to myself. It's a means to an end for me to getting information out there. But the reason why I guess maybe influencer might be the right word in terms of I don't see myself in that space because I don't create content to jump on trends, for example. And I did go down that rabbit hole for about a month last year. And I thought, oh, I wonder if I could get some more followers by, I don't know, using this piece of music or trying to use a particular caption that was generating, people were getting results in terms of followers. But then I was kind of like, and I had this conversation on the podcast with a producer called Sunglasses Kid. He said, okay, Marc, well, I'm going to give you 1 million followers. What are you going to do with them? And I was just like, oh, yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to do with them. I'll put content out, but to what end? So, I mean, it's a long way of answering the question here, but I guess in a way, yes, I'm a content creator because I'm creating content, but that's not the way I see myself in a way. That makes sense. I see myself as an audio professional that uses content just to share knowledge and experience. And if people like it, great. But for me, I'm not in the game to become an influencer and then use that and monetize it, which great to the people that do it, more for you for doing it and whatnot. Amazing.
It is a skill.
Totally. And there are some amazing, amazing producers out there. And notably, I think it might have been a conversation with yourself off air last week when we were discussing that it's no longer the big names in the industry that we all know that are the ones promoting waves, Universal Audio, Slate Digital.
Yeah.
It's the influencers and the content creators that are doing it now. So you could look at it that way. You can go down that route. But it's a very long way of saying I'm a content creator, but I see myself as an audio professional first, and I use it as an authentic way to just share knowledge and talk and network and meet amazing people like yourself through the podcast.
There's a bunch of things you touched on in there that I'm going to try to remember to go back to. I think just creator, you take the content off. I think that's the dirty part for so many audio pros. Because for me, when I started the podcast, it's almost 4 years ago, like, sure, it was like a brand recognition thing, right? But from a helping people perspective, but then there's always that like, well, maybe this will help me too. But it became a creative outlet. And like now, like I don't care how many people, small number, big number, listen to the show. I really like making it. I like making these things. I don't get to really pull up the guitar or the keyboard and make music anymore. When I get creative, it's in this space. And so I don't know, I find it energizing to get to put things out. Do you feel better when you put the podcast out like every week for a couple months?
Yeah, most definitely. You do get this sort of, I don't know if other podcasters get this, but on the release day, you get that little like release day buzz when it goes live, you know? And importantly, and I got this I was listening to another podcast and they referenced Alex Hormozi.
Okay.
He's quite easy to recognize, but he put it very eloquently in that he said, like, with a podcast, I get sort of 700 to 1,000 downloads a week. In what sort of area, in what situation, let's say, would I be able to, on a weekly basis, stand in front of 700 to 1,000 people and just talk and have them listen to me? And whether or not they think I'm waffling or rambling, which I often do, like that's the great thing about it. And even with YouTube, like my reach on YouTube is tiny in comparison to others. But still, I release a video and let's say 100 people watch it. That's still 100 people that I otherwise wouldn't have ever been able to reach, you know? And I think...
And help.
Yeah, 100%, yeah. And it comes down to when I was in the band as well. And it's that old saying of like, you perform to the sound guy and his dog and the other band's girlfriends and the other bands as the same way you would perform in front of 80,000 people at Download Festival, which has just happened over here in the UK. So that's the way I see it. And yeah, you do get that little buzz. And I see it as a challenge as well. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm creating this. And I like what you said there about being a creator rather than a content creator, because you're right. And I think that's a great way to put it. And I think to myself, well, how can it's a learning process as well. You're always learning, right? And I'm thinking, well, how can I make it better next time? And then I set myself a challenge of thinking, okay, well, I can improve the lighting. We had a conversation about using the prompter and whatnot last week in terms of moving my camera and stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, little changes like that. And I see it as a challenge. And then when it goes right, I'm like, oh, this is great. At least I know. And maybe somebody else will pick up on it. But yeah, 100%. You do get that little buzz from creating content, I think.
It's helped me relate to artist journeys, you know, because it's like when you start anything, whether it's music, podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, you're going to start something, a business that's not even music related. It's going to be really like, it's going to have such a small impact in the beginning. It's so easy to get defeated. And I feel like going through that journey, at least for me, I can relate more to a young artist who is releasing their first album and I'm mixing 2 songs because that's what they can afford.
Yeah.
I can help guide them and be like, hey, this is going to be fucking hard. I haven't put music out, but I've put this other thing out and beat my head against the wall. Like, here's some things that I've learned to help you, you know, keep going forward. But you do put music out, so that might not apply to you as much as me.
It does, in the respect of like in both sort of avenues of releasing music and the podcast. It is very much the same. I'm still at that sort of level of, you sort of like there's that group of people above me, and I'm like, man, I want to be up there, but at the same time, I really enjoy what I'm doing. If I get up there, then great. I'll shake hands with you and we'll have a few drinks. But I'm quite happy just to continue at this level and just network with some amazing people. And if like with my music, like that's kind of like a vanity project. I guess you could call it that. After being in a metal band for so many years, I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to release music that I like, and then if somebody else likes it, then great, you know. But yeah, it's so I do get that, and it's nice being able to sympathize with artists and other creatives, of which there are so many creative outlets now.
Oh, yeah.
All the journeys, there are parallels in the journeys, and they're very, very similar in terms of what you do at the beginning and how you progress on from that.
Yeah. Well, there's a real parallel, especially there's so much music. Like, I feel like when you make art, it has to be like authentic to what you want it to be. And I come from like a songwriting recording session background where like I've seen people sit down and they try to write what's hot, at the moment. That's always a mistake if you're an up and coming songwriter. Just don't do that shit.
Yep.
But the sessions where they just wrote what felt good, those were always the best songs and probably the ones that got placed. Not like you have to make what you want to make. And there's going to be an audience for that. Might be big, might be small. But you spoke about making authentic content. What does authentic content mean to you? Like, as the person that makes it, what makes it feel authentic to you? And if you were the person that saw it, what do you think? How do you know it's authentic?
It's a good question.
Weird question.
Yeah.
It's a weird one.
It is. It's a very good question. So it goes, what you mentioned there about when you're writing music and being sort of authentic, and people can quickly see through that when you're not, when you're trying to write music to jump on the coattails of something else that's been successful. I think people can quite quickly see that.
Right.
And I was going to say the same thing about creating content. So for me, it goes back to what I said earlier about how, like, even if only 100 people saw the video or 50 people saw the video, I'd rather have that and be putting something else out that I know that I'm passionate about. For example, when I put out a tutorial on Logic Pro, I did one a few weeks ago about using the enveloper, which I know there's only going to be, a small amount. There's a lot of Logic Pro users out there, but there's only going to be a particular person who's going to be interested in that. And for me, I'd rather do that because I think you can see in the way that I come across in my presentation that I'm passionate about using the enveloper to manipulate the transients of the attack phase of a signal. And that comes across in that. Whereas if I was to do one for something like Ableton, and I was talking about the Flex, I can't even remember what it's called. It's not the Flex tool. It's something, I can't remember what it's called in Ableton now. But you can see where I'd fall down because I'd try and talk about it and I wouldn't really know what I'm talking about because I'd stumble on my words and whatnot. And I think people can quite quickly see that. And I think it's that cliched word. We use it a lot, but passion, right? You can see when somebody, and that comes across in a podcast as well. And in particular, a couple of weeks ago, I redid a video that I put out a couple of years ago on YouTube with regards to removing background music. And there were a few questions on YouTube, and I thought, well, I'll do the video again. But I watched the original video, and I was like, man, my delivery. I was almost like whispering into the microphone for fear of somebody hearing me. It was so fucking weird. But then I'm talking like I am now, and then in the podcast that I do now, and I'm like, it's night and day. So, I mean, this is a bit of a sidetrack on this here, but to the audience listening, if you are putting out content, and you're thinking, oh man, I'm not very good at public speaking, I can't speak in front of people, because I get asked this a lot as well. I'm like, just the more you do it, you've got to exercise that muscle, and the better you'll get at it. And the more you do it, just sit in a room with a microphone and talk into it for like an hour, and just repeat that about something you really love and you're interested in. And I guarantee somebody else will share that interest. And the more you do it, the better you will get. So a bit of a tangent there with that bit of advice, but it's something I get asked a lot. It's quite nice when someone says to me, have you ever worked in broadcasting? And I'm like, well, no, but I'm glad you mentioned that because I quite like to. But yeah. So
sign me up.
Yeah, exactly. So that's authenticity for me, and I hope that sort of explains it in a way.
Yeah. And listening back to old videos or episodes, I really resonate with that. When I go back and like listen to that first year that I was like so proud of, like, oh, I did this. And I'm talking like, welcome to progressions. It's hilarious. But yeah, it is a skill to make these videos, like these influencers, for lack of a better term, that, put out like 3, 4, 5 videos of a high quality a day. Like they're really fast at it and really confident in it. And it's, it's like making music or playing guitar or whatever. The more you do it, the better you get. But I wanted to ask you, since you've been doing this for a little while, I've been doing this for a little while, like sharing things and making content. What is an unexpected benefit for you that you didn't think you would get out of sharing with the world?
I think the number one unexpected benefit for me, this is really more so with the podcast, is the amount of people I get to talk to who otherwise, because we all strike up conversations online with someone we're interested in, maybe a peer who's working in the same industry we are, but sometimes those conversations can come to a bit of a dead end when you're kind of just like, oh, I've got nothing else to add to that. Or maybe you come back to it further down the line and whatnot. But with a podcast, it's networking and just being able to speak to people across the world. For me, I've spoken to people all over the place about something we all share an interest in particular, and speaking to individuals that I may never otherwise have spoken to. And in particular, like audio engineers in the industry that I've had on the podcast that I may, like, if I were to just stop them in the street or just randomly say, hey, do you want to chat with me for an hour about AI and the future of mastering and music production? They'd be like, who are you? I've got places to go. But they're also delivering, I was going to say content then, delivering lectures at places like Berkeley, for example.
Right.
But I can sit down with them on the podcast for an hour and a half and basically just chew the fat over, I hope that phrase translates well with the audience.
It does.
About music production. So for me, the biggest one is just the network that I've developed and the individuals I speak to, not just audio engineers, but artists as well. And also, I think the nice thing about it as well, particularly with the podcast, is you're building trust as well. And the reason I started it initially was just I come from a teaching background. So I'm a trained teacher here in the UK. I don't do it anymore. And so I'm quite used to standing up in front of people and just talking. I didn't talk shit in the classroom, but a lot sometimes I often would go off on tangents. But it's building trust. And that's something that I didn't realize would happen as a result, is building trust with the audience enough that they would reach out to me and ask for help, which was quite a nice thing. I mean, I won't lie, sometimes that is monetized help, but sometimes it's just send me your track and I'll provide some feedback via video and let you know my thoughts and go from there. So it's kind of that network of peers and also a supportive network as well, and just meeting people and talking.
Yeah.
That's the unexpected benefit.
I would say that it's the same for me. It's not about like networking to make money. It's about networking to make friends.
Yeah.
You know, I have so many people that I can text now and be like, hey man, that record you did sound awesome. What'd you do on the vocal? Like that I would never have had communication with that person before.
Yeah.
You know, you really click in the interview and next thing you know, you're grabbing coffee whenever you're in the same person's, city. So I think that was I agree with you, unexpected thing. But you mentioned education. You mentioned that you're a trained teacher. And I love to kind of get into this a little bit. I have some future plans to talk about this more. With the amount of great courses, free content, YouTube out there in the world, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but the cost of higher education in the US, particularly in like private music institutions, is
high.
Absolutely outrageous. If you had a child that was 17 right now and they were going to would you encourage them to go to a music school, or would you encourage them to try to pay for one-on-one with somebody that they respect? Like where do you think institutions of education stand right now?
Ooh, it's a good question. I've had this discussion a few times on the podcast, and I do actually come from a music education background. So I've got a master's degree in music engineering and production, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time doing that. And I got to use some equipment that I otherwise probably never would have used unless I was doing the intern route. And going down that route, so using sort of duality SSL desks and all these, and just whenever I wanted. But there is a cost involved, and you're right, it does cost. Over here, it's at the time of recording this, I think it's like £9,000 a year, something like that. And this is going on figures from 2016, I think. So actually, that's like 8 years out of date. So it may well be more now. But that being said, I think with education over here, with university, there is the classic phrase of like, you go to university to experience university. And that's why we do it over here. So you do get this conveyor belt of, I'm going to sound like a politician a bit. You get a conveyor belt of people who go to university and they come out the other end and they're thinking a job's going to fall into their lap, and it doesn't. I mean, you may get lucky and you've done a degree whereby they're crying out for people and they want you to immediately start as an undergrad, something like cybersecurity, for example. Like I know that's quite a hot topic, and it's a good industry to get into. But With music, let's say music production, I think there is this idea that you're going to come out the other end, you're going to step into a role, and you really, like, unless you're incredibly lucky, you're not going to do that. So my advice when individuals are thinking of doing that is, like, if you want to go for the university experience, then great. However, there probably is, if you do your due diligence and research online and chat to other producers, and you're interested in music, you're going to be following these people anyway, is you could probably get a really good music production education for a fraction of the cost just by some form of like online coaching or something along those lines. But that being said, I'm not against education. Like I said, I had a fantastic time. I really did. I met some great people, had some great experiences, and I don't regret any of it. But the one regret, I say I don't regret anything, and then I say I got the one regret is that I didn't spend more time building my portfolio whilst I was at university. I was just in there recording my own projects, doing X, Y, Z, had some other stuff come in. So my advice is always, like, if you've got that equipment at your fingertips, build a portfolio. It's much like being a developer. Like if you want to move into DevOps, like, you go to a job interview, they're going to, what projects have you worked on? Show me some examples of some code, some script that you've got. And it's the same with music, all right? Like, well, show me your catalog. Where's your portfolio? Show me what you've mastered, you've mixed. What projects have you worked on? That's what you really want to focus on. And in the first instance, you're probably going to be doing stuff for free, let's say, or a fraction of the cost. You're going to be doing it for mates, and then you just build up from that and you build a name. So that would be my advice. If you're going to go for the university experience, use that time and the resources, and at the same time, build a portfolio that you can come out the other side with. Yeah, you're going to get your degree, but like, if you've got some examples of work that you can stick on a website and signpost people to, I think that's incredibly important.
I agree with all that. I feel like the institution gives you a baseline, amount of knowledge and understanding. But in this industry, it really is real world use. Like, how do people actually use this compressor? Not how did your teacher tell you how the threshold worked. And so I don't know. I think it's really tough in the production, space, especially you said 9,000 pounds over there. I think, Berkeley over here is rivaling Harvard in cost, which is crazy to come out and then be an intern in a studio.
Yeah.
But I think managing your expectations is really important. I should say I went to Berkeley like almost 20 years ago, and I had a great time. But I think at this point in time, it's really about what kind of learner you are. Some people need that classroom experience to actually learn. Other people are very self-starter, and I don't think they do. And at that point, don't spend that money. But the one thing you do get out of an institution like that is network.
Yep.
I don't think that having gone to a school like that has ever gotten me in the door or gotten me a gig. But there's a high number of people that I graduated with that still work, and we know each other because we had beers and we can call each other. And that, like I mentioned earlier, music friends is super important.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have a strong core group of music friends that I met 20 years ago. So crazy tangent. I didn't think we would talk about education, but
No, it comes up. I often find it comes up as well. It's an interesting one with education. I do agree with what you said there as well, though. It is that like meeting people. And also, I think when you are in an educational establishment and you are being taught by lecturers, tutors and whatnot, and you mentioned there about the threshold on a compressor, you're I mean, I'm not saying they're wrong, but that's just one person's opinion. I mean, a threshold is a threshold, but it's just one person's opinion. So you need to, it goes back to experience, doesn't it? And trying out different compressors and then working out what they do and whatnot. So I think if you use like a university experience for the right reasons and do what you said there about networking and have that supportive group of peers that you can take on, and then just, building that portfolio, I think that's the way to do it. And you got to look at how you learn, like you mentioned there. I think that's important as well, because some people, and I've done this in the past, whereby I've done an online course and it's very autonomous, and then I've fallen short for that reason. And I need, not that I need someone to micromanage, but I need those deadlines, and I need someone to say, Marc, have you done this, blah, 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 and then explain it in front of me. So people do learn differently. So you got to look at that. But cost, that's expensive.
I've definitely done better in like live cohort type courses than I have in like self-paced style things. Because I love to take a course and learn some new nonsense that I just love learning shit.
Yeah, say that.
Whether it applies or not, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm doing the same at the moment. I'm doing this. I joined this thing which is Facebook ad mastery or something along those lines because I was just like, you know what, I'm gonna because I keep hearing people say it. They're like, oh, like people stop using Facebook ads because they think it doesn't work, but you just got to do it the right way. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna set myself a challenge. I'm gonna see if I can do it the right way. So
it's the right way.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I'm going to go down this rabbit hole now of Facebook ads, and they'd probably come out the other end thinking, actually, I probably didn't need them anyway. But hey ho, like it's just another thing that I want to learn how to do, and
yeah,
I think this is important, like with regards to being a creative, because you think, okay, I'm in the audio industry, and I create music or I help others create music, but you can be creative in so many different ways being an audio engineer. You can be creative in business and how you promote your business and how you market your business. And you got to see, it's almost like gamifying it and seeing it from that creative way.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it. And it goes back to way back what we said at the beginning about creating content and like getting that content buzz. It's because I just like being creative and then challenges and like, can I break, not can I break Facebook ads or Meta ads, but can I break through and actually master it and think, yeah, I've got this under my belt now, and then I'll move on to the next thing, whatever that may be.
Yeah. Well, and you never know. Like it might not help you, but you could be working with an artist and you're like, hey, try this. And that could change their career. And then the fact that you mixed or produced their record, you go up the hill with them. So
yeah, exactly. You never know. You might, like you mentioned there, you have a discovery call with an artist and they're saying, oh, I want to put this record out, but last time my marketing was shit. And I'll be like, well, I can help you with that because I've now got Facebook ads under my belt. So step into my office and I might be able to help you or not. Yeah. So you never know when that knowledge, which you may think isn't relevant to what you're doing, will come to pass and actually possibly get you a gig you may not have otherwise got.
Yeah, I think the more, you had a Stringer podcast that, you were touching on AI a lot, which people should go check out. The more value you can bring outside of your skill set, I think is super important as, technology continues to become readily available to everybody. There's going to have to be an extra value add for why so-and-so is going to mix your record and so-and-so is going to, like, what are they bringing that's different than ozone and ATCs and a well-treated room? What is it? And that's what people, I think, need to figure out for themselves.
Yeah.
But, okay, you mentioned Gamify, and I wanted to ask you a question about this. You have a thing called the producer scorecard.
Yes.
That kind of basically you're rating your day as a music producer. And I think there's a saying that I believe in, what gets tracked gets improved.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's actually the saying, but can you share a little bit about that producer scorecard and this concept of like kind of gamifying your career as a producer?
Yeah, most definitely. So it's the producer growth scorecard. The idea being is that it's a 28-day challenge, but you can take it on beyond 28 days. And it's an entirely free tool that you can download. So you can go to synthmusicmastering.com/scorecard and you can download it. And there's a video there that will explain it all as well to guide you through it. But it's pretty straightforward. So there are particular tasks that you can do on a given day, and each task is given a particular score depending on what it is. And you can change this as well to fit your own agenda because not everybody's going to be doing the same thing with regards to production. And then the idea being is you attribute what you do on a day and you attribute points to it. And at the end of at the end of each week, you look at the points that you've accumulated, and then you correspond that with the goal that you've got at the moment, which might be to, I know this is a common pain point, and that's having a folder full of unfinished songs, for example, with producers or artists. And then the idea being is you do this producer growth scorecard, you gamify your music production, and then you'll see a correlation between the amount of songs that you finish and the score that you get. Or it might be the amount of songs you release over, let's say, depends what your cadence is, let's say over the course of 3 months, you might have a song a month, and it might just help you kick on beyond that. And it goes back to what you said there about tracking. You can use it to track, okay, well, I think I'm doing this. And then you look and you realize, oh, actually, I'm not putting in as much time as I thought I was. And that's probably why I'm not kicking on and progressing and exercising that creative muscle as much as I should be. Or you may find you're doing more than you need to. And that might be why you're burning out. You're thinking, actually, I'm doing all this and I've got this score here. But in fact, I don't need to do all that. Like, and like I said, I'm all about tracking and tracking things, like tracking what you're doing in terms of music production and mixing, tracking what you spend, and if you're losing weight, tracking what you eat. Like, it's such a good way of seeing results, because it's kind of you're disciplining yourself as well. You're thinking, okay, well, I know I've got to put in my score at the end of today, so I need to do this 15 minutes of arrangement. I need to come up with an 8-bar loop in 15 minutes to hit that target score. And then you're just, I think the saying is, if you do something for 4 weeks, the habit turns into a routine, and then you just move on from that, basically. And that's why it starts. That's why it's kind of, for one of a better way of putting it, marketed as a 28-day scorecard, because you've got that 4-week routine into habit. So yeah, head over to synthmusicmastering.com/scorecard, and you'll be able to download it for free from there. And there's also the video as well.
Oh, nice. Well, I'll make sure I'll put that in the show notes as well. Yeah, I think that's awesome, because I found, not tracking something like that, but I found that tracking my time on projects and what I'm doing was like super eye-opening a few years ago. I talk about this on the podcast all the time, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole again. But yeah, going to the gym, tracking progress, like what is your squat?
Yeah.
What is, it's like, if you want to make progress, you kind of have to know where you're at.
Yeah.
Was it difficult to come up with a ranking that seemed to make sense for things? Was it kind of hard to put together?
No. I mean, truth be told, I did it something similar with the podcast, and that's where I came up with the idea. I magpied the idea with his blessing from another podcaster, and he said, "Yeah, Mark, run with it, change it, do what you need to do." And I was like, because it worked. I had the hockey stick curve growth for the podcast, because I was kind of like, it was doing all right, and I was thinking, oh man, I want to get to that another benchmark in podcast downloads as we do, and then I did that, and it helped. But the way I came up with the scoring was I actually sent it out to some producers and artists that I know and said, hey, do you mind just having a quick look at this? Like, what do you think the scores are? Do you think they're equivalent to, is the weighting correct to the task? Good. And they sort of said, no, I think it should be this. I think it should be this. Maybe you should add this to it as well. So that's how I came up with it. I got feedback from the actual podcast audience and some other producers and artists, and they helped me score it, which was nice, because I think as creators, we can often, and I did this with the podcast when I was first starting out doing tutorial episodes. I was kind of like, well, I think this is what people want to see, so I'm going to put this together. And it's the same with that. Like, until you start talking to your audience, if you're going to go down this route of creation, you won't really know what they want. And they'll soon tell you. I mean, people will tell you what they want to see. And a really good tip here, and this is a bit of a tangent, and I saw this online the other day, is if you are stuck for ideas, if you're thinking, actually, I want to start a podcast, or I want to start creating useful tips online, look at the big accounts in this sector that you're in, whether that's mixing, production, or whatever. Just look at the comments and look at the questions, and that will give you a quick idea of, okay, well, I can see this question's cropped up quite a lot. I'm going to make a note of that, and I'm going to create a video tutorial on it. It's only something I started to do recently when I was thinking, actually, I could probably come up with I need some bit of inspiration to go forward.
Yeah.
But obviously do it in an authentic way, as we mentioned earlier. Don't just think, if you're a Logic user, don't just think, well, I'm going to do a tutorial on the basics of Fruity Loops, because you'd probably fall foul, or you'll spend a lot of time doing it.
Yeah. There's one thing YouTube will do, and somebody's probably doing it right now. They will tell you when you made a mistake.
Oh, 100%, man.
in the comments on YouTube. But I'm stealing that trick. I'm gonna do that tonight and look for some more, just content ideas, because
it's good.
You really need to understand who you're speaking to, and like your personal pain points or your personal interests define, like, your journey. But that's still just, you need to take your journey and intermingle it with everybody else's. Yeah. So the great move by getting the input on the scorecard, I think that makes the scorecard way more effective, because it's not just your perspective, it's, a bunch of people. So I think that's awesome.
I think that's incredibly important. Like, I do it all the time. Anytime I'm thinking of doing something, I've got a mailing list. It's not huge. It's just approaching 1,000 people, I think, something like that.
It's good.
Which I say it's not huge. I mean, that's still 1,000 people that I can reach out to at any given time. And anytime I'm thinking of doing something, I'll fire it out. And the open rate is, I don't know, something like 40% or something like that. But I know I'll get some really good feedback in there because, again, like, I could put stuff out that is my pain point, is important to me, but I'd rather help other people. One thing I did with the podcast in particular was, and this is quite hard to do and get people to do, was I get them to record questions that I would then answer on the podcast. Because again, it's just answering pain points. Because it's like classic being a teacher as well. If you look at a room of 30 students, you can imagine a high percentage of them all have the same problem, but none of them will put their hand up until one does. And then they're all like, oh, yes, that's the same.
I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, man. I'm like, put your fucking hand up then. But I could say that in the classroom. But yeah, it's getting feedback like from your listeners is really, really useful. Really big advocate of that.
Do you think there's a parallel to that for an artist? Getting feedback from your fans?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it is. I think it is. But I'm also, I'm a champion of artists that like to experiment as well.
Yeah.
And like change their sound and do something different away from the norm. And you hear and you see the horror stories when it goes wrong with big artists when they change their direction. Metallica, for example, in the 90s. But that being said, like, I still like the Load and Reload albums. And this right now, if you put this on YouTube, I'm probably going to get absolutely shat on for this. But when they cut their hair and whatnot and went down that route because they were sort of changing, and then Saint Anger, which I still really, I do listen. I like Saint Anger, and I like listening to Saint Anger. And it wouldn't be the same if you didn't have that snare drum. But it's that change, and like it's something different and something interesting. And I'm all for artists trying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to know your audience and what they like, but I certainly wouldn't be scared of doing something that's slightly left field just because you think you're going to lose some of your audience, because you probably will at some point. But at the same breath, you're going to pick up new listeners. You're going to pick up a new audience as well. And you can think that with podcasting. Because you could pivot and start doing different episodes. And you probably will see a drop-off in listenership because they're thinking, actually, that doesn't really resonate with me anymore. But you'll pick up others as a result of that. So, yeah, I think it's important as an artist to be in contact with your audience, talk to your audience, know what they like, and have that conversation and be open and approachable in that way. But I certainly wouldn't be against like trying new things at all.
It's a fine line. You kind of have to cater to the audience, but then not really. not when you're making art. You know?
You got to cater to them, but then again, you got to do what you want to do and what you like.
Yeah,
100%.
Well, let's move away from all that. I wanted to talk mastering. Like I mentioned before, you had a string of episodes with some great guests. You guys talked about AI mastering a lot. There's a lot of things, AI mastering, these things that I'm calling algorithmic tone shapers, like Gulfoss, I always say that wrong.
Yes, yeah.
Or just like the tonal balance meter in Isotope. It gives you like that target range for anybody that's not familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think tools like this are running the risk of creating a generation of young engineers that are too obsessed with matching an EQ curve than they are developing their own sonic preferences and tastes?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't think it is. I don't think it is, because I like to think there's enough education out there on these tools, because I think when you start using these tools and then you look at the videos online of how to use them, I like to think there's still an emphasis on like knowing your craft in particular, like knowing the basics of EQ, knowing the basics of compression, just to throw those out there, for example.
Yeah.
I think there is the potential for artists, engineers maybe, to lean on them too much. You could potentially fall into that group, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
My general response is with AI and stuff like that, essentially with AI, it's working off a data set, right? It's working off this data set, and it's taking your music, and then if you boil it right down to the fundamentals of computing, it's transistors off and on. It's just saying yes, no, and it's going down this algorithmic route of what you've created. So use it as a starting point. And then what I like to say is like reverse engineer. So if you chuck something into Gulfoss, now I'll hold my hands in the air and say I haven't actually used it yet. I know what it does, but I haven't used it yet. Or Isotope, and then think, okay, well, it's suggesting this. Why is it suggesting that? And then reverse engineer and think, okay, well, it's saying that I've got too much going on in my low mids here, around 300 hertz, if you're doing a master, for example.
Yeah.
Go back and listen and think, okay, well, why is that? Is it your room? Are you listening on monitors in a room that isn't treated effectively? You'll probably find that more in the low end. Or is it your headphones? Or is it something that you've got in your chain altogether? Have you got just too much going on there and figure, okay, well, I'm not just going to slap that dynamic EQ on there to correct it for me. I'm going to go back to the mix and I'm going to figure out what the problem is. So I think reverse engineering and using it that way is really, really important. I think also as well, if you are using something like Isotope and you've got all those individual modules in there, is just because they're there, it doesn't mean you have to use them. And I think that's really, really important. Just because there's a stereo image plugin in there doesn't mean you have to use it. Just because there's an impact plugin doesn't mean you have to use it. They're great, but I think there's that as well. You could throw the kitchen sink at something when you might have a master and all it needs is some compression, some EQ, and then maybe just a bit of opening it out in the top end or something like that. Don't overdo it. But I think the key thing there with AI is reverse engineer. Why has it come to that decision? And then also think to yourself, is using a static data set at the moment, and I do trust it. I do trust what it's saying. And what it's saying, it's trying to give me the best possible output based on what I've put in, inputs and outputs. But that's why I think also sending it to, this goes back to what we said earlier about having a supportive network of peers. Well, it's saying this. I'm not entirely sure. Send it out to someone else and get their feedback and see what they think.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of, I've heard a lot of people talk about using Ozone Master Assist as a mix tweak tool. You're gonna be like, okay, look at what the EQ curve did. Okay, that seems really aggressive. There must be something. Well, I'm gonna go look, like just like you just mentioned, to kind of reverse engineer it. I think is interesting. But if you know, and I will say that Isotope makes amazing tools. I don't like Master Assist, but Ozone is fucking so powerful. You can do so much with those modules. But if you're using these tools, like particularly, I think it's called Spectral Shaper in Ozone, or like Gulfoss or Soothe, right?
Yeah.
These things that are reacting to what you're doing, if you are mixing into these things, and I have to credit Matt Huber, mix engineer, has been on the show, super talented. People should check him out, for bringing this up, because I never really thought about it. Because I had Soothe on my mix bus for a long time, and I liked what it did. And there would be times where I would turn it off and be like, "Oh, this is better." And then he brought up the fact that like it's working against you the same way that like a compressor or a saturation plugin is working against you. You're pushing into these things, so you're making EQ changes, and you have Gulfoss on the other side compensating for that change you just made. So I think it's important that if you're using these kind of algorithmic things, try to put them on later. Like, do most of your work without those things, because
100%, man.
You're gonna fight yourself. I don't know if anybody's ever pushed a background vocal up like all fader all the way to the top, just to realize that like you had a Fairchild on the bus that was just like completely slammed down.
Yeah,
no, just me. Anyway, I agree. I think keeping the data set in mind is also an interesting perspective as well.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think what you mentioned there is right. I certainly wouldn't mix into it, and I wouldn't master into it. I think like Logic has got its own master assistant now. If you want to get a quick reference track to send as a demo or something like that, or get a quick idea of what it could sound like, then I think it's great, because we cannot. This is another thing as well. Don't get fooled by loud is better. That's where it's really important, folks. If you are going to use these tools, is to gain match. Listen to your mix at the same volume as your master, so you can listen. Actually, what have I done, or what haven't I done? Because I think when you're starting out in particular, you can quite easily get fooled by loud is better, and you don't want to go down that route. But also, I think what you mentioned there about like the plugins working against you. And you stick something like Soothe on there, like you mentioned. They brought out something, Bloom, I think it's called recently. That's a bang.
Bloom, yeah,
that's a banging plugin. I've got a lot of time for that. But anyway, you maybe you want that track to be a little brighter than the AI is saying that it should be. Maybe you want it to sound a little more bottom heavy, and the AI is saying it shouldn't be that bottom heavy, according to its data set and what it knows. So you got to think of it that way. Actually, from a creative point, I want it to be brighter. I want it to be wider. I want it to be more bottom heavy. So you don't always think just because AI is saying it's got to be one way, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
There's a difference between working in an untreated room and being inexperienced in the way that something might be bright or bassy, and making those decisions because everybody in the project was like, I want this to be dark. Billie Eilish, for example.
Yeah.
Could that first record be much darker?
Yeah.
But it's fucking amazing. It's so good, and it's so emotional because of the way that it sounds. It's like
it fits
the only thing in the top is her. You know?
No, I think that was who mentioned that? I think I was speaking to Jonathan Weiner on Inside the Mix, and he said he mentioned the same record. He said, if anything, like it's too. I can't remember his exact phrasing now. I think he said it's too bass heavy. I think he said something along those lines.
Yeah, technically bass heavy.
yeah. But that was the creative choice. That's what they wanted.
Yeah,
and it sounds great, and it fits the aesthetics of this moody, dark, melancholic sort of sound of an album, and that's what the artist wanted. So you got to run with it.
Yeah, there's like that. The title's something with a crown or something like that. The low end in that is so out of control, and it's perfect.
Yeah,
like, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. I remember when I heard that for the first time, I was like, "Whoa, this is on the radio? This is crazy." It's just, yeah.
She performed at Glastonbury, which is just up the road from me, and I wish. I mean, I'm not like a fanboy of Billie Eilish by any stretch, but I still would have liked to have seen the live show for that reason. I reckon that would have just, you probably would have felt that bass. It would have been amazing.
Her new record sounds really great too. It's like, that's a really great study in, I guess, juxtaposition of like really having contrast between elements. Some things being very bright, some things being very dark, some things being very dry, and just making very, very purposeful decisions. And whether you like pop music or you like Billie Eilish, I think there's something to take away from how deliberate those records are.
Yeah.
Like, they made those choices. And I think that's something everybody can pluck into their artistry.
And I think the great thing about it goes back to what we said earlier about like making creative choices. And I suppose she was at the point where she started out where she could do what she wanted because she was building her audience. But like some of the vocal processing as well, like the use of, I think it's tremolo on the first album or something along those lines, the vocals moving. And you're thinking, how often do you hear that in pop music around this sort of, and pop music, I mean, you could spend a whole 3 hours talking about pop music and how stagnant it can get and how boring it can be. And then you have an artist come along that just totally shakes it up, which is what it needs.
And people embrace it. And now it's like such a reference. And you're like, I want this to sound like Billie Eilish. I want this to sound like Billie Eilish.
The amount of vocalists that have that particular vocals. I've got a track where I literally marketed it as Billie Eilish style vocals when I put it out for that reason.
Dude, this is great. I know you have stuff to do. I've got a couple questions that I hit everybody with.
Yeah, sure.
So let's do those. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 because I'm having a good time.
Yeah, definitely.
So was there a time in your career where you chose to redefine what success meant to you?
I've always had the sort of same thought processes, and that's if like I just want to do something music related and enjoy it. And it's always been like that. I've never been about, and if I can do it and earn a living, then fantastic, you know? But it's never been about accolades for me or anything along those lines. I just love music. I love being involved in music, which is why I sort of do the podcast and this content, write my own music, mix and master other people's music and production and stuff. So I think there was a time, I don't know if it was necessarily tailored towards success, but I was in the band and I loved being in a band. I was doing this heavy metal stuff for about eight or 10 years, but it sort of plateaued a bit. And at that point, I think that, and maybe this is when, because I suppose when we were in the band, we were chasing success. We wanted the label deals, we wanted the big tours and stuff like that. And then I realized actually, I probably invested a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of money into this now. I want to take a step back because it's more like a 9-to-5 job to me that I'm not particularly enjoying. And I want to get back to what it is what I like about music. And that's basically just what I said there, just putting out music and doing stuff that I really enjoy. And so long as I can continue doing that, that's success to me. You know, if I'm still enjoying it, if I'm still enjoying it every day, then that's success. Rather than chasing the record label and the tours and stuff like we were doing in the band.
Yeah. I think there's that's a very kind of common sentiment with this question. And I think there's a lot to the frustration that comes from not meeting your expectations, and especially when those expectations are created by somebody else. It's like, well, what is the expectation of being a huge metal band? Okay, so then when you don't check all those boxes, it's frustrating when you're not Metallica Part 2.
Well, exactly. It's that classic when you're in a band in like we have over here. We drive 2.5 hours. You play to a handful of people, then you got to drive all the way back, and then go to work in the morning. I'm like, this is great. You got to. I know when you're in a band, you got to do the hard miles and stuff, and we did that like to the nth degree. Yeah. And then I figured, actually, I'm going to go back because there was a turning point, and we were recording an album, and I was like, actually, I want to know how that guy is. What is he doing on that console?
Right.
What is he doing? And that's at that moment I sort of moved to the other side of the glass, so to speak, in terms of my focal point. And that started me on the path to where I am today.
That's awesome. What right now is your current biggest goal? What's the next smallest step you're going to take to go towards it?
Ooh, that's a good question. The biggest goal at the moment is probably podcast related at the moment. I do this thing where I set myself, this goes back to what I said about tracking, and I have like quarterly goals.
Nice.
And my big goal for the year for the podcast is to get into the top 10% of podcasts. And that is, to do that, you have to have 400 podcast downloads within the first 7 days. And just approaching it. And for me, the next thing I'm going to do to continue that progress to that particular goal is to get on more podcasts and just chat like we are today. For me,
yeah.
The more you do that, and it's just getting the podcast out there and communicating it to other audiences. So that's the thing for me. Is just it's a tricky one with podcasting, because you kind of don't want to reach out to other podcasts and say, "Hey, man, I want to be on your podcast." You know, it doesn't really work that way. And I think it's the same with music as well. Like, hey, man, can I be on your record? It's like, well, no, you sort of got to do that dance and everything else in between, you know, and build that rapport and that network and that friendship and everything else in between. So that's the big goal for me, is to continue, because I want the podcast to reach as big an audience as possible, and just help as many people as possible as well. And it's just put it out to as many ears as I can. So that's the big goal for me for 2024.
Yeah, well, you're in front of a new audience now. People should be clicking over to Inside the Mix and hitting subscribe.
Yeah, please do.
Marc does a really good show. It's a mix of interviews, and then it's almost all Logic tutorials, right?
Yeah, it's Logic. Well, I mean, there are elements where I use other plugins and stuff, but I try and keep it as, yes, Logic users. I mean, that is narrowing the audience in terms of tutorial, but I figure if you're a Logic user, I'm going to use Logic plugins, because not everybody has the Soundtoys suite and whatnot. So
I listened to one you did the other day that was you were doing the new Logic stem splitting.
Yes.
And I was at the gym and I was like, I want to hear how this works, and I don't want to load Logic up again. I hate waiting for Logic to open. It takes so fucking long.
Pain in the ass, man.
But no, Marc does a great show. You should check it out if you're listening to this. If you're a fan of progressions, I think there's a lot of good value in his show. And maybe I'm on there. If you're hearing this, maybe you'll see an episode with me on his show. So I think this will be out after that.
Audience listening, if you go back and listen to episode 151 of the Inside the Mix podcast, you can listen to Travis on the Inside the Mix podcast. So that's episode 151 of the Inside the Mix podcast.
Marc just went to the future to get that information.
I did.
And I do not have a similar answer. I have episodes that I'm deciding on like 2 weeks before or 3 weeks before, of like, oh, I love this conversation. This is the one I'm going to do this week.
I do that as well, to be fair. I do. I think, well, this is a banging episode. I'm going to bring that one forward. Or like, yeah.
Makes me feel better. Dude, this has been great. Tell people, give them the website and everything and the name of the show. Anything you want to share with people, go for it.
Yeah, so as we were saying earlier, head over to synthmusicmastering.com/scorecard. You can download the producer growth scorecard there. And if you just go to synthmusicmastering.com as well, you can learn all about what I do. And then obviously the podcast, Inside the Mix. And you can find that on all podcast platforms. And you can watch it on YouTube as well, if you're more of a voyeur in terms of how you consume your content. And check that out there. And it's also on Spotify. Although fucking episode went live yesterday and Spotify balls it up. So I'm not Spotify are my bad books at the moment.
Spotify's in everybody's bad books at the moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, again, that's another.
It's a whole other episode.
What was that content creation that he mentioned? Content creation
is technically free or near zero.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, no, I could rant for. I mean, I think, you know, why not? We have a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Everybody is supporting Spotify inadvertently by like every time an album comes out that I mix, I share the Spotify thing. I'm just going to stop doing that. It's like free promo for them. They're not paying anybody shit.
Yep.
And eventually that's going to trickle down to all of the behind the scenes people. Like the less money the artists make, the less money they're going to spend. And ultimately we're all going to be sitting around wondering what happened. And Spotify is definitely falling out of my good graces, aside from the fact that their algorithm is goddamn spectacular. They give me music I love.
They do
all the time. And that is like why people will not leave.
It's good. The Discover Weekly is very good.
It's so good.
Did you try I don't know if it's still available. They had like a DJ feature on it. I haven't seen it of late, actually. Maybe they pulled it. Maybe I just had the beta version of it. And then it was some guy talking to me, and he was like, "Hey, Mark, today, this time in 2016 on a Wednesday, you be listening to this band," and then it would play it.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
And I was like, "Oh, this is great." It was playing like stuff I was listening to in my later teens and early 20s and stuff, putting on some like Funeral for a Friend and whatnot. And when I was going down this sort of like more emo-y rock metal route, and I was like, "Oh, this is great." But I haven't seen it since, and I thought it was a great idea, but maybe they shelved it. But
well, whatever. Tidal and Apple Music sound better, and I wish that, because we make music for people to hear. Like I want them to hear a better version of it. I don't know. I think the tides are going to turn on Spotify. I hope so. If you're listening to this still at this point at the end of the show, give that Apple Music Tidal, consideration. Maybe it's time to jump ship.
It makes you wonder whether they know that's going to happen. I think I had this conversation with another engineer on the podcast, and they were saying like it's got to that. It hasn't got to critical mass or anything like that, but you can see Spotify pivoting. They've got video podcasts. They're bringing in a feed whereby we're going to be able to update it akin to something like Instagram, TikTok, where we have a video feed. So you can see how they're yes, like music is the bread and butter and whatnot, but you can see how they're bringing in these other elements.
Yeah.
Trying to get us all to move over. And then they put the fucking price up as well. So,
yeah, every time. All right. Well, on that note, Marc, it was good hanging, man. We'll talk soon. One day I'll make it across the pond. We'll hang out.
Yeah, man. And when I eventually get over to the States, most definitely, I do need to do that. But yeah, whenever you're in the UK, mate, it's a much smaller place. Wherever you land, let me know. And I could probably be there within a couple hours, to be fair, because it's a pretty tiny island.
One day I'll be there.
Yeah, do it, man. That'd be amazing.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah, man. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Progressions. Thank you so much for watching or listening. Be sure to check out all the links and resources mentioned in the episode down below in the video description or in your podcast show notes. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast, please leave a review on Apple or Spotify. It helps the show so much. And if you're watching on YouTube, feel free to drop any thoughts or questions about the episode down below. Let's keep the conversation going. For those of you watching, you'll be getting a link to another episode you might enjoy popping up somewhere right about now. And for those of you listening, check out the YouTube. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I will see y'all next time.